Hello and welcome to another Capital Ideas. I'm Sandy Behan and our guest this week is Theta Dempsey. You're Administrator of Parking and Transit Services for the University of Oklahoma. Is that correct?
That's it.
Boy, I got through that one. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always good to have you. We have you about once a year to talk about parking, transit, and money and where it is and isn't coming from these days.
That's right.
And what that means for the city of Norman as well as for the University of Oklahoma. I thought we might begin simply by talking a little bit about your job as administrator because you have moved into a different capacity from the one you've been in when you've been here before.
That's correct. About this time last year, I was appointed as Administrator of Parking and Transit Services. As far as what that job entails, we're of course responsible for university parking and for the transit service, not only for the university but for the city of Norman. And there are lots of things involved with that. We're making some progress in terms of parking. I know that one of the issues that always arises is that it's hard for the community to come to the campus because of the lack of parking spaces and the lack of parking spaces for visitors to campus. There are a couple of things that we do to try to accommodate those groups. And first, a call to our offices at 325-3311 to make arrangements for those kinds of visits are welcome, and we love to work with community groups who want to come to campus. The other thing is that we are going to, within a couple of months, have online about 150 short-term parking spaces in the new parking garage that are available for visitor parking. And we think that will help, particularly since that facility is located in the fine arts area, and so many patrons of the fine arts have had difficulty trying to park to buy tickets, much less go to the production. So we think that will help a great deal.
That facility will be open sometime late April, early May, hopefully?
Yeah. Part of that depends on the spring weather. Lots of rain means it will delay some. But certainly we'll have it open as soon as possible. Then, of course, the other thing is the transit service, and that touches much of Norman. We have 5 routes that travel throughout the city, every reason you can imagine why people need transit, and where they're going. Shopping, work, we have lots of people who ride to work and back. School, entertainment and shopping areas, service agencies.
How far east do you go?
Oh, the furthest east we go is Vicksburg, Biloxi, east of 12th, but not as far as 24th.
All right, but then you do all the way out to the Sooner Fashion Mall going the other direction, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then mostly just around campus in the downtown area.
Mm-hmm.
Now you do have the old Veterans Center, the old building, that is about to be turned into a community services building. There is a cart stop there, and that will continue, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And people can go to the different, what about some of the different agencies in town, like let's say Action Incorporated or Food for Friends? Are there accessible stops for places like that?
We come within a few blocks of Action and within a few blocks of Food for Friends. Some of those agencies will be combined in the community services building, and we'll be having a stop right there. As a matter of fact, we look at that on the transit side as a real plus for our customers, because now instead of having to travel all over town, they can travel to one place.
Okay, now your job is as Administrator of Parking and Transit for the University of Oklahoma. and yet your service extends throughout the city of Norman and even the Metro Transit that runs between Oklahoma City and Norman. Is that correct?
That's right.
How does this happen? I mean, how do you expand that to these other agencies and other entities?
Actually, that happened about 10 years ago. When we joined forces with Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority, which is the transit authority in Oklahoma City, we participate with them in a federal grant program, which at that time paid half the operating expenses for the transit system. That allowed us to expand into the city and serve the citizens of Norman, not just the University of Oklahoma. In the 10 years since that time, of course, that funding has gone down so that it now covers only 12% of our operating expenses.
So how do you pay for it? The service has continued and it hasn't really been cut back, has it?
Not significantly.
Then how do you continue to pay for it? Because the cost of riding has not increased that much, as I recall.
That's correct. Last year we faced our largest budget problem ever in that we had a $170,000 budget shortfall. Through monumental efforts of my staff, we were able to offset that budget shortfall primarily through reductions in expenses. We eliminated 8 positions. Most of them were vacant. I have one person now who is doing what 2.5 people did before. Just wonderful work on the part of my employees to try to make it possible for us to offset the cuts and continue the service.
Now, Senator Trish Whedon was here last, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, and we talked about the fact that there were public transportation proposals in the legislature to try and add more funding. How would that affect you directly?
Well, we would receive some of that money. As a matter of fact, one of the things that really saved us last year was an increase in state funding. The State Transit Revolving Fund actually is dispersed among the 19 transit agencies in the state of Oklahoma. We're one of those agencies. Increases in that fund directly mean increases in our state funding. What that allows us to do, last year it allowed us not to cut service because it was the final piece that meant we would not have to reduce service. This next fiscal year, fiscal 98, we know the federal money will remain the same. We know the university money will remain the same. What we have to worry about are cost increases for next year to maintain the service that we have now. As you well know, costs for everything go up every year, so we have to offset those cost increases. Increases in state funding are one way to do that. Perhaps an increase in city funding would help do that.
Do you see that happening?
We have requested an increase in city funding, and we're certainly providing all the information that any legislator asks for in terms of the state funding and what an increase there can mean to us.
Now, in your capacity, do you serve as a lobbyist to the state legislature?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not?
No. What I do try to do is let our local legislators know how those bills will affect us in terms of increases or decreases. And sometimes the bills are not strictly funding issues, but other issues.
What groups then, if you're not the group, or you and people like yourself are not the ones who are doing the lobbying, then how do the legislators know or understand or appreciate the needs of public transportation? Who's out there speaking for you?
Well, actually, Oklahoma has a transit association of which we're members, and that association regularly puts together fact bulletins and just to keep everybody abreast of what's happening with transit in Oklahoma.
Do you think that the legislature, quote unquote, gets it? Do they understand the importance of public transportation? Or do you think that that's not the problem, that it's the general public's perception of public transportation that causes you to have to struggle all the time?
You know, I think our legislators are aware of the needs of transit. You know, they have to do a tremendous balancing act every year in terms of what funding can be given to what, and it's just like when I get my paycheck, I have priorities, and the legislature does a terrific job of recognizing needs. Perhaps they can't fund it at a level they'd like to. I think the public is becoming more and more aware of basically the necessity for transit. Not everybody needs or wants public transit, but my community is a better community because we have public transit available for those who don't have other means of getting around town.
Okay. I had a thought and it just left my mind, unfortunately. I was thinking about when your predecessor was here. Oh, I know what it was. Okay. The construction on I-35, all right? You put in more buses to run more metro transit buses, trying to get some carpooling or people riding the bus to the city as a way of decreasing the amount of cars on the highway. And for a while, ridership was up. Has it maintained or has it dropped back?
On the Center Express, which
Yeah.
is the commuter route between Norman and Oklahoma City, ridership continues to grow.
Okay.
And most of those people are going to work. And I do have to say it goes both ways. It's not just Normanites working in Oklahoma City, but people who live in Oklahoma City working in Norman.
So that ridership has continued, even, you know, because there was always that concern that, you know, once the novelty wore off and the newness, that people would go back to driving their cars. For whatever reason, they go back to driving their cars, but that has continued.
It has. I regularly talk with one of the university employees who comes and buys a bus pass for his wife who works in downtown Oklahoma City, and every time I see him in our offices buying a pass, he talks about how much better it is for her just to get on the bus and ride to downtown Oklahoma City and back instead of driving, contending with the traffic, and that in fact it's cheaper.
Those of us who grew up in the Chicago area where we had public transportation, I know that very well, that once you use it, you don't understand why anybody would want to drive their car. But what's the most common complaint you get in your office?
The bus is late or the bus is early.
The bus is early.
Well, you know, everybody's watch says something different.
Okay.
And when I look at my watch, that's the time I think it is. Whether my watch is
Right or wrong.
Yeah, right.
Okay. All right, we'll be back in just a moment with two students from Central Mid High School. student guests this week are Chuck Fry and Joe Crocker. And Chuck, I believe you get the honor of asking the first question.
Yeah, Ms. Dempsey, what part does the cart play in Norman transportation?
Well, it's the most extensive transit in Norman in terms of public transit. Action Agency runs a route on the east side of town that's called the Mouse, and I believe last year they carried in excess of 23,000 rides just on one small van, and that's good ridership. CART covers more of Norman than the Mouse does, but certainly there are other transportation opportunities.
Do you ride public transportation regularly to see how it is?
Well, actually, let me answer your question two ways. When I go out of town to another city, I always ride public transportation there. And here in Norman, I do ride occasionally just as part of my job, if for no other reason. I don't regularly ride public transportation to get to work, to go shopping, but lots of people do.
How many buses does the cart and the Mouse and all the different transportation routes have?
Well, we have 18 vehicles. At our peak time, 12 are on the road. Action Incorporated now has 2 vans. One of them runs the Mouse route regularly, and they also do some demand response service with their other van. They also do a trip to the Votech and back.
Did you ride public transportation when you went to college?
When I went to college, my public transportation was my feet. I went to college in the mid-'60s here in Oklahoma in a small town. There was no public transportation there, and I didn't have a car either. Most students didn't then.
I know Norman Public Schools is having trouble getting bus drivers. Does the cart have the same problem?
You bet. We just closed our effort to hire more drivers. Took us about 3 months to hire a driver. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that the requirements are fairly stringent. You have to have special licensing and driving test. The other is that both the public schools and the jobs we have available are not full-time jobs. And sometimes that makes it difficult.
I suppose the buses use diesel fuel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is there a possibility that the buses could switch to a more better fuel for the environment?
Actually, we have some of our vans are CNG capable, and we run them on CNG. We have at the university a CNG fueling station. And we would expect any new vehicles that we purchase to be CNG capable. We have dual capability on the ones that we have that are CNG capable.
And what does CNG stand for?
Compressed natural gas.
Okay.
What's the maximum capacity of a cart?
Of our vehicles?
Of your buses?
Well, we have different sizes of buses. I think all of you know that we have trolleys, and typically those will seat from 25 to 32. And then our transit buses, most of them seat 40. We do have a couple that seat 45.
Would you call the public transportation system in Norman safe?
Yes, absolutely.
What do you think is the biggest problem or the biggest need that needs to be changed that's facing the CART or the Norman public transportation today?
Well, federal funding, and there's more than one issue there. I don't know if you're aware of it, but 3 cents of the tax you pay on gasoline goes straight to Washington. Well, not straight, but goes to Washington for the Federal Transit Trust. Oklahoma sends $30 million a year to that trust in fuel taxes to support public transit. Oklahoma only gets back $12 million statewide, and that's a problem. There are 23 donor states in the nation that send much more than they get back. That's an issue for us. If all of our transit needs were being met, it wouldn't be an issue, but we have unmet needs, and yet the majority of the money that I pay, you pay, your parents pay in those fuel taxes goes to other states. We'd like to see that turn around. We currently only get about 40% back that we send. Senator Inhofe, in fact, has authored a bill as part of the reauthorization of the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, otherwise known as ICE-T, that would return to states whose contribution to that trust is $45 million or less, return to those states 80% of what they put in. That would effectively double the federal funding for transit in Oklahoma.
Would you know what to do with all that money?
Oh, absolutely. There's so many things that we need to do that would meet needs that people have asked us to do, but we simply have not had the funding to do.
Where do you think the best public transportation system is in the entire country, and why do you think so?
Oh gosh. Well, first, I haven't ridden all of them, so I can't say what the best one is. I've ridden the T in Boston, and it's very good. I've ridden Metro in Washington, D.C., and it's excellent also, as it should be because they get lots of funding.
It is very good, though. That is
Yes. I've ridden public transit in Chicago. It's also excellent.
true. And on time.
What do the cities do to make their transportation systems so good? Is it the money that goes into them?
Yes. You know, the Boston system and the Chicago system are almost eons old. The Metro in Washington is a relatively new system in terms of the subway train portion of it. There are a number of things they do. Most areas that have public transit systems have some kind of dedicated tax, typically a sales tax, because that's a growing tax, so you keep up with inflation. And that really is how most areas fund their transit systems.
You're also in areas, I think, too, where the people are less dependent on automobiles because of the simple gridlock of trying to drive on the highways. And that hasn't happened enough here yet in Oklahoma for people to really appreciate public transportation.
Well, that's true, and if you go to New York City, just to garage your car costs more than paying a mortgage here in Oklahoma does. So there are economic reasons why people use public transit in densely populated metropolitan areas.
Where do you see public transportation in Norman going in the next 10 to 20 years?
Oh, I would love to see it growing and covering more of the city. You know, there are many areas of the city that we do not touch simply because we don't have the funds to do so. And that's what I'd love to see happen over the next 10 to 20 years.
Can citizens rent out the buses that you use for public transportation if they pay a amount of money?
Well, we do charters. That means for an hourly fee, we provide a vehicle and a driver.
How often does that happen? How often do citizens come in and do that?
Well, you can call our office at 325-2278. Some of the typical kinds of things. First, community groups sometimes do charters for an event they're having. We also do get a number of people wanting us to do a charter for weddings, typically from wherever the wedding is happening to wherever the reception is. So those are some...
The trolleys are real popular for those things, aren't they?
Yes, yes. Most people who do charters within the city want a trolley.
Okay.
Would you like to see, like, I don't know what it would be called, but like a railway system put in Norman, connecting like Norman to Oklahoma City, where like a light rail where people could commute from Norman to Oklahoma City?
Light rail systems are wonderful, and in fact they're fairly economical to operate, but they're very expensive to put into place.
How many square miles does the Norman public transportation system take in?
Probably about 5.
5 square miles?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Any more questions, guys? Got any more?
I don't think so.
Okay, I think we've pretty well touched most of the bases. Thank you very much for coming this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And hopefully the legislature will help you out this year. And maybe the bill that Senator Inhofe has introduced, what's its status?
It has gone nowhere yet.
Well, nothing's gone anywhere yet in Washington, so.
A number of changes have happened on the transportation committees.
Right.
In fact, I think that the last appointments were just made perhaps last week, so they've not begun meeting yet. But it will go to committee.
Okay, we'll go to committee and hopefully we'll get some movement.
Yeah.
Good. And we'll be back next week with another Capital Ideas.